usual, if you have any trouble hearing me, or if you have any trouble seeing the slides, speak up. And otherwise, welcome back to our second week of class. I'm glad to see, I think all of you have returned. So to start off, I'll just make a bit of an announcement, which was that last week I had a bit of a misunderstanding, I think, with which level of CAD class this was. You recall I was presenting from the CAD level 3 class slides. So my understanding is actually this is the CAD level 1 class. And so with that in mind, that also explains why a lot of you have not used Onshape before. And so what you saw last week, that was like a good introduction to our motivation, why we want to learn CAD. But knowing what I know now, we'll take our time and ease into a better introduction of how to use the program. With that, if anyone has any questions to start off with, or they want to raise any like problems or issues that they had between last week and this week with like getting their Onshape account set up or something like that, feel free to ask, or you can type in the chat. I'll pause just a moment for that. Do you have a question, Leah?
Yeah. Like when I X'd out when I had it, like, and I already signed in and everything, and I went back in today, it did not have like, I don't like, I have the password, but I don't have any username. And yeah, I can't get back in.
All right, so do you remember, or did you make a note of your like login credentials? So your username is probably like going to be the email that you use to create your account. So for me, like I use my email, and the password, you say you know that, so you can just type. Yeah, try that. Let me know if you can get in. Was everyone else able to? Is everyone else currently able to open Onshape right now and see their workspace? I'm going to start off by assuming you can. So if you cannot, Leo, you're good. I see the thumbs up. Great. And no one else says anything. This is the last call. It's very important that you speak up now. If you, oh, Landon, do you have a problem?
It says to activate, it says to go to my email and activate it. But when I went to my email, nothing was in there.
In a case like that, I would probably suggest checking your spam folder or something similar. The verification email may have just gone to your filter. Make sure it's the same email that you used. That's really all I can say right now, but assuming that you can also ask like Onshape to resend that verification email, or you should be able to through that whatever account creation page you're on right now. So while you work on that, I'll just give you guys another brief overview of the adjusted expectations for what you'll do over the next 7 weeks, I guess. So that whole robot project thing, that was intended for the level 3 class. So here we'll probably not get to work on that unless we have some time at the end and you're very efficient getting through the CAD level 1 content. But in the previous iterations of this class, we've often done like a simple number of CAD projects. So these are some examples of what they've done in the past. Maybe we can do something similar. I always like to do this one here, which is the sprocket machine, the little sprocket like you might have on a bicycle with a handle, and it's an assembly so you can rotate the handle and watch the sprocket spin. The other one is this, I like to call it the do nothing machine, but it's a little handle that spins, and as you rotate the handle kind of in a big circle, the two sliders in their ways will kind of reciprocate back and forth. So it's an interesting motion. I believe it's also called like an ellipse trammel, but once we model that together, we'll have a better understanding of how it works and how it moves, and I think it's a pretty fun project. So over the course of this class, I'll start you basically from nothing, opening Onshape for the first time, and we'll work our way through these projects. And by the end, you should have an idea of how these things are built on top of each other, from making sketches to making parts in Onshape and then joining them together into an assembly, which shows you how these different parts can move together. Another focus of this class kind of in the past has been on like 3D printing, especially from a hobbyist perspective, where you might be able to maybe get a personal 3D printer for a fairly like low price, or you might at your schools have access to like a 3D printer in one of your classes. I think, for example, in middle school, like the school had like for a design and tech class, there was a 3D printer, which I got to do a project on. So I will talk a little bit about 3D printers, but the main focus will be going through these CAD projects, especially since we're kind of in an online format. So are we all good on Onshape? I hope the recovery email situation is sorted out. If not, let me know. And anyone else too, if you're still having an issue, bring it up. If you're responding like in the video, I might not see you because I don't have like all the video up, but just a chat message or speaking up and unmuting is usually the best way to get my attention. All right, great. So I'm gonna go forward. Everyone has Onshape. Welcome to the club. And as I kind of introduced last week, this is kind of the home page where you can see all the various projects that you've created. In my case, I've created a few projects just for teaching these classes. In your case, if it's a brand new account, you might not have anything in the middle here, but on the left, it's the same toolbar. In the top, it's the same like home bar with your account settings and your whatnot. So the first thing you're going to want to do, you may have done this last week, you may have done this on your own if you were kind of playing with things between the class just to try to learn something. But what you're going to want to do is hit create in the top left corner and hit document. And each of these kind of CAD projects that we're going to make is going to exist within a document. So you type in a name as you have before, and if you hit OK, it takes you into kind of this work area. And at the end of the class last week, I went over the different movement controls. So I'll go over that again, because that's kind of your main way that you're going to interact with this workspace in terms of how you're going to look at it. So like I said, scroll wheel, that's your zoom. You scroll up to go in, scroll up, scroll down to go out. So it's kind of similar to, for example, like in a browser, you can control and scroll to zoom in and out of your browser. Similar idea here. Next, your left click has the select function. So right now there's nothing really in my in my space here except these 3 planes. But you can see as I hover my mouse over each of these 3 planes, the front, right, and the top, you can see they kind of get outlined in yellow. And if I click on them, the whole thing gets highlighted. And that tells me that currently I'm selecting the front plane. That's my focus of attention. If I do something, for example, create a sketch, then it'll choose the front plane to create that sketch. And to remove the selection, you can just click in the background like so. To rotate your view, that's your right click. So if you hold your right click and move your mouse around, that kind of rotates your view along with how you move your mouse. Another way you can do that, I strongly recommend that you use the mouse, but the arrow keys on your keyboard also have a similar function of rotating your view left, right, up, down. So if you forgot to bring a mouse one day, you'll have to use that as a workaround and your touchpad, which is not the most enjoyable experience. I guess you can always, if you have a touchpad, you can right click and drag as well. And third thing, middle mouse, that's your mouse wheel in most cases. If you have a standard mouse, you can click on that and drag, and that will pan your view. So it'll move everything to follow your mouse. So you can always do that to move around. Another thing that you have access to is this kind of navigation cube or control cube at the top right corner. This one tells you always what direction you're looking at, like in terms of this 3-dimensional space, like we talked about. So we have our X direction, our Y direction, our Z direction. It's like your Cartesian coordinate systems that you learn about in math class, or maybe we'll learn about in math class. And it's a similar idea. You can adjust the view of your workspace just by clicking on different parts of the cube, and it'll just take you right there. You also have these arrows, but in general, I don't really use this as much as just using my mouse to move myself, reposition myself in space. So hopefully the movement is familiar to you at this point. I know you had at least a few minutes to play around with it, and it'll only get more familiar the more you work with it. The next thing we're going to do is really start to jump in to how we make things in CAD. So as you saw in these slides, these are just some of the examples of what you can model. So these are all 3D objects. You can imagine, like in real life, these are real objects that you could create or you could have and hold in your hand. And so what we're going to do is go through the steps that you need to go through in order to create that kind of a model in here. Do you have a question, Leah?
How do you go there again? Like no, I mean, I know how to go to the website, but how do you go to like the making stuff?
Yeah, so when you log in, you should be in a page that looks something like this, except the middle might be empty for you. So if you have nothing here, if you didn't create a document already, in the top left corner, there's a create button. You can hit create, hit document. And then when you hit document, it asks you for a name. You can just type in a name. And if you hit OK, it'll take you to that workspace that I was just in. If you've already created one, or like if you create one and come back later, you will see that document with the name that you put in this list here in the middle. So if you recall, today, just now, I created CAD 1 week 2. I just created that like a few minutes ago. And if I want to go back to it, I can just click it from this middle selection area. And I do that and it takes me here.
Thank you.
All right, so now with that, we're going to jump right into it. And that's with the sketch tool, which I also mentioned last week, but don't worry about it if you forgot. It was a bit of a packed day with figuring things out, but when you hit the sketch button, again, that's right over here. First thing, it says sketch, it's a little pencil with a line under it. It brings up this dialog box. And I'll say sketch 1 if it's your first sketch. And you'll see the first thing it draws your attention to, it's this highlighted box in blue that says sketch plane. And it's telling you, where do you want to make this sketch? So what all these words mean, what planes mean, what sketches mean, it'll become more clear. But for now, just stick with me for a second. The sketch plane is going to be what surface, what direction, where you want to draw the sketch. Like where is this piece of paper if you're trying to draw this sketch in a 3D space? And right now we only have 3 options because there's nothing in our workspace except for this front plane, this right plane, and this top plane. As you can see, each of these things are kind of represented as squares, and we refer to them as planes just because they refer to kind of that direction, that area of space. So top is kind of, for example, this entire space that exists in the YZ or the YX coordinate system, right? If you've taken some math classes, you might have plotted graphs in X and Y. That entire XY coordinate space, that entire region is all contained within the top plane. Likewise, the front plane is all in your Z and X. The right plane is all in your Z and Y. And even if that is a bit confusing, maybe hopefully the concept of a top, a front, and a right is going to make some sense as we go through it. And so I pick the top plane. You don't have to, it doesn't really matter at this stage. But the way you select that, again, when you hit sketch, it brings up a sketch dialog box. And the dialog box prompts you, it asks for something because it has a blue highlighted field that's empty. And it'll ask you for a sketch plane. So all I do from there is click top, and it populates that sketch field with top plane. That was my selection. You can see as I hover over it, it turns yellow because that was my selection. And that's all I have to do. Now I'm working in a sketch. And what you'll see, what you might have noticed, is that when I'm in this sketch workspace, and I know I'm in the sketch like kind of workspace because I have this dialog box open that says sketch 1 on it, my tools have changed. So this might be brand new to you, so you didn't notice that it changed. But what you'll see is that these tools are sketch tools. They allow us to do things within sketches specifically. And so they only appear when you're working inside of a sketch. Do you have a question, Leah?
Yeah. Like when I do it, it's just like this.
I'm having a bit of trouble seeing your screen. Could you maybe describe what's happening?
I have a blur. Yeah, it's like that. It did not show
Okay,
like
so
that top.
yeah, right now you're totally fine. So what's happening now is that you're just, the sketch is there. It's just that you aren't looking at it head on. So you can see there's this like fainter, larger rectangle, and in the corner it says sketch 1, right? And so that is your sketch. It's just, I was looking at it like head on. It's just, you can also have the option to look at it from like an angle, from like a 3/4 perspective, or even from the side where you can't really see anything. And the way you can kind of work around all this is either you can kind of navigate using your right click and drag to make the sketch be in your main like field of view. Another thing you can do is use your navigation cube. So if you know that you created your sketch in the top plane, you can just press top on the navigation cube. You might have to spin it a bit to find it. But if you click on top, it'll make it so that you're looking directly into your sketch. And another thing you can actually do is if you're just like looking at it somehow, some way, you can right click, and from the options that show up, the very last one is view normal to sketch plane. Normal in the sense meaning perpendicular or directly at. So if you view normal to sketch plane, that also just snaps you there. So kind of 3 ways to do it. Probably the easiest is just hit top on your navigation cube, but you'll be looking at it head on. Yes, do you have another question?
Yeah, like when I go into the like I just touch top, how do you get out of it?
To get out, remember your general like rotation control method is going to be with your mouse. And so if you hold right click and drag your mouse around, that rotates your view, right? You can also click and drag or zoom in and zoom out. But right click is rotating. And if that doesn't work, you can always like use your keyboard arrows or use the arrows on the navigation cube. All right, so now we're here. What can we do? The idea of a sketch is that you're kind of drawing a picture entirely in 2D. It's like drawing on a piece of paper. And actually back in the day when we had draftsmen and engineers would create all their drawings on actual pen and paper, this would be done on a piece of paper. So kind of as a callback to that, we call them sketches. And whenever you think of sketch, just think of 2D. We're only drawing pictures on a paper, right? There's nothing that comes out of the page into the page. It's all within the page. And so if you look at these options that you have, you can kind of hover over to them to see what they are, and you'll end up using most of these. I guess the longer you work with CAD, you'll probably use all of them eventually. But I'll just demonstrate the first couple. The very first one you'll see is line. And so the way you kind of enable a tool, the way you tell Onshape that you want to start using the tool is you click it once. And now when I move my mouse away, you can see that the line tool is highlighted. And that just means that right now I'm using the line tool. You can see when I move my mouse back into the workspace, my mouse is now like a crosshair, it's a plus sign. And that's like before, if you forgot, it was like a normal cursor mouse shape, but now it's a plus sign, which means I'm working with the tool. So how do I use this line tool? First things first, I just have my cursor somewhere and I click once. And you can see as I start moving my mouse around, that first place that I clicked, that is the first endpoint of the line that I just made. And wherever I move my mouse, maybe is going to indicate where that line is going to be. So maybe I want like a line kind of going this way. When I know where I want my endpoint to be, I can click one more time. And you can see the line just got bolder, it got darker. It's blue now. And as I move my mouse away, now you can see it's starting to create another line. So if I do want to create another line, I can just click again and it'll create another line. And I can keep doing that just to create line after line after line. If I don't want to do that and I'm done, I can stop using the tool either by going back and clicking on the line tool again, or by hitting escape on my keyboard. So one more time from the beginning, this is called the line to sketch tool, and it allows you to draw lines in your sketch, in your 2D drawing that you're making right now. And the way it works, you select the tool by clicking on it in the toolbar once. When it's enabled, your cursor changes, and then you click once, you click twice, you draw the line, and when you're done, maybe I just want to draw one line this time, you can hit escape, or you can just click on the tool again to deselect it. So that's the basics. You just created your first sketch object, which was a couple of simple lines. And if you're good with that, now you might be wondering, okay, how do I get rid of them? Maybe I don't like the lines I drew. Maybe I don't want that to be in my final drawing. And this kind of takes us back to our basic controls. So how do we select things? You can left click on them, just this normal click, left click, and that'll select it. And you know it's selected because it turns yellow. And once it's selected, to get rid of something, you can just hit delete on your keyboard. It's different from the backspace. There's a delete key, which is sometimes a cause of confusion. I guess backspace does work, learn something new. But you can delete entities just by selecting them and hitting delete. I'll create some more lines just to show you. Another way you can select things in a sketch, if I want to select all of these line segments that I just drew, one thing I can do is just go through one by one and select each of these lines. Now I've selected all of the lines, and if I hit delete, they all disappear, right? Another way that I can select a lot of things is something that might be familiar to you. If you left click and drag, it creates a selection box. And like you might expect, the things that you encompass with your selection box all become selected. So that's kind of a easy way to do a big selection as opposed to going through and clicking one by one by one. Do you have a question, Leo?
When I do delete when I'm selecting, it is not delete.
So what you'll want to do is make sure the lines are selected. They'll show up in like an orange or yellow color. And you can hit delete on your keyboard if that doesn't work. I believe another option you have is to right click. And then at the very bottom of that right click menu, you have the option to delete the sketch entity. And that works the same way as the delete key. But the key thing is to make sure that you actually do have it selected. And the way you do that is to left click or group select it using the box dragging, and just make sure that they turn orange before you put your next command in, which is delete.
When I also do the right click, it does not work. And like when I'm done with when I'm done with the line, it keeps showing the line, and I cannot delete.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's happening there is, like I said, when you're done using a tool, you need to tell Onshape that you're done using the tool, or it won't let you do things. Like in your case, you found out that it won't let you delete if you're still using the sketch tool, or the line tool. So what's happening there, like you're seeing something like this, and if you look in your toolbar, you'll see that the line tool is still highlighted, which means it's still active. So what you want to do is just click on it again to tell Onshape you're not using the line tool anymore, or you can just hit escape on your keyboard, which will make it stop doing the thing where it tries to make another line where your cursor is. And after that, you should be able to select all and either right click and delete, or just hit delete on your keyboard. All right, that was our very first sketch tool. You can imagine lines are very useful, but they're not exactly the most powerful thing, perhaps. You do need other things in your toolbox to make things like, say, this phone stand or the little sprocket handle machine. And so I'll show you one more tool before I do kind of a conceptual demonstration, and then we'll come back to doing more advanced sketch things together. And so we'll move on to the second tool in our repertoire, which is the rectangle. So you can see right next to the line tool, there's a tool that looks like a rectangle. And this one is slightly different from the line tool. You'll notice at least one thing is that to the right of it, there's this little down arrow. And that just means that the tool has different ways that you can interact with it or use it. So let's not worry about that for right now, but I'll come back to it. If you just click the rectangle tool, you can see by default, the little text box that shows up, it's called corner rectangle. And so again, just like the line tool, you click on it in the toolbar to activate it or to start using it. And once you do that, you move your mouse away, you can see your mouse turned into a crosshair, into the plus sign. And now, give it a try. It works just like the line tool, except that instead of creating a line, it creates a rectangle where one corner of the rectangle is the first place that you click. The other corner of the rectangle is in the second place that you click. And as long as I have the line tool, or sorry, the rectangle tool active, I can just keep drawing rectangles just by clicking one corner, opposite corner, just like that. And when I'm done, you need to remember to hit escape or to click on the tool again, make sure it's not highlighted anymore so that Onshape knows that you're done making rectangles. So you can imagine if you needed to make a bunch of rectangles, instead of using the line tool 4 times for each rectangle, it's a lot faster to just click and make a rectangle that way. And it's the same idea. These fundamentally are the same type of sketch objects, which are line segments. It's just that you have a tool that kind of, it's kind of like a macro. It does it for you, right? Makes your life easier. Same deal, like there's nothing different from this than the lines. You can delete them just by selecting and deleting. And that's kind of what you got. So I'm going to move kind of in a way to get to show you this class how a sketch can be turned into a 3D object. Because right now we're just working in our sheet of paper. Remember, we created the sketch in our top plane. All the work that we're doing right now is just on a 2D environment. So how do we get from there to a 3D environment? So I'm going to answer this question, but don't think we're done with sketches quite yet. There's a bit more that we need to learn. But just to give you a sense of direction of where we're going, let's say that I'm trying to make a very, very simple 3D shape, which is a cube or a rectangular prism. The way this comes about is you start by creating a sketch, just like we've done, and then you'll create a sketch, or you'll create something in the sketch, right? In my case, since I'm trying to make a cube or a rectangular prism, the thing that's going to be in my sketch is like a square or a rectangle. And so you know now how to do that, right? You know how to create a non-shape document, you know how to create the sketch, you know how to create this within the sketch. Now that you've done this, and let's say that I'm happy with this, I'm done. When you're done with the sketch, what you can do is hit the green check mark. Remember this dialog box. This is what showed up when we first told Onshape we want to make a sketch, and it stays open as long as we're still working inside the sketch. But when we're done working inside the sketch, you hit the green check mark, and that tells Onshape you're done. And when I do that, now you'll see I'm no longer in the sketch workspace. If you go back to the toolbar, you can see the tools all changed into what it was before, things we haven't seen, we haven't worked with yet, but they're not the familiar like line and rectangle and circle option anymore. It's just these other things. And you can see also that the sketch has turned into like a grayed out collection of lines instead of the blue and black lines that you saw in the sketch workspace. That charging my computer. All right. And so we're kind of working our way up into a 3D object. We just created this sketch, and now we're going to turn this sketch into extending it into 3D. And the simplest, the most common perhaps, the most basic tool that we use to do this is the very first one in the list. So right after sketch, remember that's what we use to create the sketch. To the right of it is a tool called extrude. And if you're familiar with the word extrude, it kind of means like pushing something through. You might have heard of like extruded, I don't know, extruded aluminum, where you have metal that you push through a mold that's in a certain shape and you get a long bar or a rod of metal that's in that shape. It's a similar idea where you can imagine you're just kind of trying to push some mass through a mold that's been drawn in your sketch, and it'll extend that into your 3D object. Maybe my explanations aren't the best here right now, so I'll just show you. if I click the extrude tool, again, it brings up a dialog box. It's kind of like when we entered our sketch environment. It tells you that you're working with a feature right now, and that feature is the extrusion. And again, just like the sketch, it prompts you for something. It wants something from you. And it tells you that with this empty field that has a little blue highlight on it. And it asks you for a face and sketch region to extrude, a face or a sketch region. And what that just means is a region within a sketch, which is what we just created. Remember, the sketch had just a rectangle in it, and a rectangle is a kind of a closed region. You have an inside and an outside of a rectangle. And what we care about is like the area that the rectangle encloses. So what I can do here is just click on this rectangle that I just drew. If you remember, this was my sketch. All I did was I kind of rotated my view. So I was looking at it from an angle in 3D, but it's the same thing. Maybe this helps also clarify what I meant when I was sketching on a sheet of paper, right? That sketch that I drew has no thickness. It's just a rectangle that exists within the top plane. Do you have a question, Leo?
Yeah, when I did it and I was done, it's just like this, and the front part I cannot.
So your voice cut out for a moment there. I didn't hear what you said.
Front thing, right here, it cut out a bit. So how do I make it?
Sorry, I can't really like tell what your problem is, just because I can't see your screen that well.
This box thing, top, front, bottom, and right and front. How do you get like and the top is cut off? How do you get it back to normal?
So do you just mean that your view is kind of like you're kind of looking at the bottom of the thing you're interested in, right?
Yeah.
Right. So this is where we use like the pan feature, and what I mean by that is what I showed you with like the middle mouse click. So on your mouse, you should have like your mouse wheel. You can actually click that, and that's your mouse 3 input. And if you hold that and you drag, you can just move everything around. So right now you're looking at it like this. If you middle mouse and just drag down, it'll bring everything down a bit. And hopefully that works. I believe there's an alternative like command you can use. Yeah, the alternative, if you for some reason don't have a middle mouse, is control right click. So if you hold control, then also hold right click, then move your mouse around. That does the same thing. So if you don't have a mouse or something, or your mouse doesn't have an M3, then you can just do that. Right, so right now I'm just trying to go through like every step just to work our way from nothing to 3D object. Don't worry, we're going to come back to this tool many, many times because it's so fundamental, but this is going to be your first, maybe you've seen it before, exposure to how this all works, how the big picture plays together. So where I left off, we were asked for a face or sketch region, and what I can do is just click on that rectangle that I created in my sketch earlier. And what happens now, you can see it's kind of previewing for me in a transparent way the shape that I'm going to be creating. And you can kind of see what I mean by extruding, right? You can imagine, maybe you've played with those like Play-Doh toys before, where you have like a little shaped mold, like maybe a heart-shaped mold, and you push the Play-Doh through the mold, and it just comes out in a long like strip of that, in a long rod of that shape. So that's all we're doing right now. We're taking our sketched shape and we're extending the material. We're pushing it through that shape to create a solid object. And that gives you an idea of how we're working. Almost all of our work happens in these two-dimensional sketches, and yet we use these to create 3D objects. So to be more specific, maybe you don't have to worry too much about this right now, but you can specify a depth. And that just means like how far you should push the material out to create this object. So maybe I'll just say 1 inch. This doesn't really mean anything right now because I didn't dimension my original sketch, but I'll go back and cover that in a second. There's a lot of other things you can do here. You can see there's all these different tabs and like options. don't worry about them. We will use a number of them later on, but for now, all you need is just leave it on the default, solid, new, select the region, blind, depth doesn't matter. You can just drag this arrow in, make it to your liking. And once you do that, just like the sketch, when you're done, you tell Onshape, okay, this is what I want, and you hit the green check mark. And you can see the preview, the transparency goes away and it becomes a solid object. And just like what we saw in like our slides earlier, these are all solid objects. They look like these little gray models, 3D models, and that's kind of what we just created. Do you have a question, Leah?
Where's the extrude? I can't find it.
Yeah, the extrude is the very first tool after sketch. So first, make sure you're not in your sketch workspace, and you do that just by clicking the check mark on sketch. Once you're in the main workspace, you'll see the extrude option. And so that was your, I guess, crash course in how we get from making lines in 2D to making things like this. There are more steps, there's a lot more involved, but this is the general formula that we're going to follow whenever we approach a new problem, right? We look at the object, we think about what shapes we're going to draw, and then we think about how we're going to turn the shapes that we drew into solid objects.
How did you make it into a square cube?
So, yeah. So what you should have from having your sketch earlier is like a little sketch in your workspace. And if you have that with the extrude tool, you don't have to touch anything. You just use all the default options. And with the default options, if you click on that square that you drew, it will give you a little preview and you can adjust it to match your liking and then hit the check mark. So now from here, we're not gonna come back to the 3D tools for a little bit because there's a few things that we need to solidify back in the sketch stage. So we'll take a step backwards, and as we do that, I'll introduce one more thing before we go back, and that is the feature tree here on the left. So you notice when you first created this workspace, we have this whole like interface here on the left. And when we first came in, when we created it brand new, there was nothing in it except for origin, top, front, and right, which were your 3 planes and the very center of your workspace, which is the origin. But now you can see there's 2 new things in it, and these are the things that I created. I created sketch 1, that was the rectangle that I drew in the top plane, and I created extrude 1, which was the cube. And what I'll tell you is that as you continue to create things, I could now at this point create another sketch, and I could do another extrude, I could create another sketch after that, and I could work with one of these other tools. And every time I do something like that, every time I create a feature, a sketch, it'll add itself chronologically in order of when I did it. It'll add it to this feature tree. And you can think of it kind of like a list, a record of everything that you've been doing. So like the record goes to show, first there was the default things, there was the top, front, and right plane and the origin, then there was sketch 1, then there was extrude 1. This feature tree, as I'll call it from now on, it also allows you to select the things that you're working with. So it's not always easy to select something, maybe because like your different features will merge together or something like that. But in the feature tree, you can always go back and select something by clicking on that feature in the tree. So let's say I want to delete extrude 1. I don't like my reason is I'm going to take a step back and go back to the sketches. So I'm going to delete the extrusion. And the way I can do that is just go to my feature tree. I can right click it just like I would to delete a sketch entity, as you saw, and I can just hit delete. Another thing I can do, I undid it. I can just left click it and hit delete on my keyboard. All right, now I want to go back to that sketch I was working in. But you can see like I don't have the sketch tools anymore. I don't have like the line tool, the square tool. It's all missing. And that's because I'm not in the sketch workspace. I can go back into the sketch workspace by creating another sketch. If I hit sketch right now, it'll create a new sketch for me. But that's not what I want. I want to go back and edit the one that I was working in before. And the way I can do that, I can simply go back to my feature tree, this list of everything that I've been doing, and find the thing that I was doing that I want to go back to. And that's the sketch one. Again, if I click on it or right click on it, you can see the second option here is edit. And that's what I want. So again, I'm in my 3D workspace. I realize, oh, I want to change something about this first sketch that I made. All I have to do is go back to the feature tree, find it, it's sketch one. I right click it, hit edit, and now you can see it just transformed. I'm back in the sketch workspace. And I know that because there's a dialog box, it says sketch one on it. And my tools have changed all back to the sketch tools. So line, square, etc. We've only worked with line and rectangle so far. But we will start doing some more advanced things now. So start off, just delete whatever you had in that sketch before, whether it was a rectangle or whatever. Just make it empty. And now I'm going to pose a bit of a problem for you. What happens if I want to make, for example, like a rhombus shape, a square that's tilted kind of diagonally at a bit of an angle? So what you'll notice, the concept I'll introduce here is what we call relations. And you can notice whenever I create a square using the rectangle tool, doing something like that or that, it's not quite the same as if I used the line tool and just did a connect the dots and made 4 lines and joined them together. You can see that when I try to adjust the rectangle, I can do that by clicking on one of the blue points and dragging them around. The ones that I created using the rectangle tools, they always stay as a rectangle. No matter what I do, it'll be a rectangle. On the other hand, this thing that I created using my 4 lines, this thing, it does not always stay a rectangle. In fact, it wasn't a rectangle to begin with, but you can see that I can kind of turn it into a trapezoid. I can make a kite out of it. Just by clicking and dragging the different points, I have the power to kind of make it whatever shape I want. So you can see that there's some kind of difference between what I created using the rectangle tool and what I created by myself using the line tools. And that difference is what is called relations. So when you hover over the different parts of these rectangles that you make using the rectangle tool, you can see these little icons pop up sometimes. Those icons are what we call relations. So there's a lot of different relations. We're not going to go through all of them today, but they are pretty important in terms of understanding how we create our sketches to be more robust, more sturdy. Because you can imagine if I'm trying to design something and I want a rectangle in it, I don't want my rectangle to be able to be transformed into a trapezoid just by clicking and dragging on it. I want it to have a fixed and concrete form. So I'll start off and I'll introduce a few relations. And I'll just start doing that using the line tool. So first of all, how do you create a relation? All of your relations are at the very end of your toolbar. And by default, it'll be like the coincident relation. So if you go all the way to the right, if you have a wider monitor than me, maybe they're all like kind of splayed out and expanded, and you can see all of them. If you have a small monitor or a smaller one than me, you'll probably see it in this drop-down format where you have like coincident, and you can drop down. you have a question, Leo?
Yeah. When you make that thing, like when I make the sketch and I do top, and I use the line one, and I use the line, and I try to make a square with it.
Yep.
I can, and when you say to like use the dots, when I do that, I cannot sketch it out like bigger and make it. I cannot make it
I'm not quite sure I understand. What are you not able to do when you create this?
I cannot like make it. Not like when you said to like you could make it another shape. I did that, and then I it can't do anything.
So without seeing exactly what it is, I would guess that the thing is that you can only move points really by clicking and dragging them. So you need to make sure that you actually click and drag on these blue dots rather than say the lines, because it's usually more constrained if you try to move lines.
When I move the lines, no, I mean when I move the dots, like whenever I'm not when I'm done with it and I'm trying to go to say yes, the check mark, like the line will still be there and it will just like go long, and then I cannot make that stop.
So make sure, as before, that whenever you're done with the line tool that you're deselecting it, either by hitting escape or clicking the line tool again. If you're having
yeah, and then you could, oh, now I get it.
Right, so yeah, that's the thing you need to remember. Just
I
whenever you're done
that
with the tool.
time. I tried that one time.
Yeah, whenever you see something weird that doesn't let you do something, just look up and make sure none of these things are highlighted, because that's a pretty common thing that happens. Right, so relations. We're getting towards the end here, but I'll quickly go through like a few of them. So hopefully you're able to find this. It's very right in the drop-down menu. If you have a wide monitor, wider than mine, they might all just be like side by side by side, and there's no drop-down. Either way, they're the same tools. And you can see, like, going down the list, there's coincident, coincentric, parallel, tangent, etc. And some of these words have meaning to you. Maybe some of them are not meaningful to you, but some of them surely, like horizontal and vertical, you've at least heard of before. And so the way you create a relation is using these tools, much like you'd use like a line tool or something, for example. And so I'll start by showing you like a simple relation, which is the horizontal one, just to show you like how a relation works and how to use it. And so to start, just like any other tool, you click on it. You saw I dropped down, I clicked on horizontal, and it's highlighted, which tells me that I'm currently using a tool. Again, my mouse turns into a crosshair. And now I can apply this relation. Right now, my tool is turning things horizontal. And if I click on things, I'll turn them horizontal. So this line right now is clearly kind of slanted. But if I have this tool active and I click on the line, it becomes horizontal. So hopefully that works for you. And what you'll see now is that this line is now changed like fundamentally. If I hover my mouse over it, you can see one of those icons that you saw with the rectangle show up. It's the same icon that the tool itself has, which is this horizontal line. And whenever I try to change the line, whenever I drag it around, you can see that it always maintains that property of being horizontal. That's what the relation does. The relation adds a new rule to your entity. that constrains what you're allowed to do with it. So when you use the rectangle tool by default, it has all these relations built into it that constrain its geometry so that you can't just drag it into a trapezoid or something. It'll always be a rectangle no matter how you drag it around. Do you have a question, Leo?
Yeah, like when I go to the close search, it only has line, corner, rectangle, extrude, and revolve. And when I have to search like horizontal to see horizontal.
So if the tools you have are like extrude, revolve, and so on, make sure that you're in the sketch workspace right now. Because if what you're seeing are mostly like 2D. Right, so at the very far right, it's right there. Right before your search tools bar, there's a drop down arrow. Your mouse cursor is right there. Yeah, that one. If you hit the drop down next to it, which is the little down arrow.
Right here?
Yes, the little down arrow right next to that icon.
And then
Or you want the down arrow, right? If you look at my screen, next to the icon, there's a down arrow.
Oh. Why don't I have a horizontal line?
That's because I just selected the horizontal tool. So by default, it looks like this, right? This is what you had. And it just shows you like the most recent one you used. So I most recently used horizontal because I just demonstrated it.
And then when I do this, I can make it horizontal.
Right.
Like, how do I make it horizontal?
All right. So again, like let's say I have a line here and this line is completely unconstrained, right? So right now I can do whatever I want with it. The way you apply a relation is using the horizontal relation. You click it just like any other tool, and then you click on the thing that you want to apply that relation to. I want to turn this line horizontal, so I use the horizontal tool and click on it.
But what? Yeah, could you connect things? I connected it.
Sorry?
I connected the lines together.
Yeah, so that's another relation. In fact, the one that was there by default, coincident, has that function. So I'll show that one right now too. Let's say that
and it's
I have
black.
Yeah. So I'll go over all these things. We're running a bit short on time, but the idea is at our end goal here in terms of sketching is to make everything turn black. Right now, like all the things on my sketch right now are blue. But as I apply relations, as I apply constraints to the sketch, they'll start turning black. And what that means is that they have no more freedom. They have no more ways that they can move and still satisfy all of the rules that I put on it. And that's good because whenever you design something, whether that's like a part on a robot or like one of these designs that we have as the examples, what you don't want is for your design to be able to like randomly change to other things just because someone went in and like dragged things around. You want everything to be defined perfectly so that there's only one possible way that that sketch could exist. And that'll be achieved when everything turns black. So we'll go into this in greater detail next week, but right now what you should try to integrate is the idea of these relations, these rules that you're applying to the things in your sketch in order to limit the ways that you can interact with them. So connecting lines together, like you mentioned, Leo, is you can either, there's a few ways you can do it. One of them is like implicitly just by dragging a point and placing it on top of another point. And you can see when I try to do that, it kind of prompts you with that little yellow box. And below to the right of my cursor, there's a little coincident icon.
I cannot.
But I can do that explicitly too by going to the relations tool itself, activating the coincident tool. The relations tool is the thing that like we just went through together with the drop down. Each of these is called.
See it anymore.
So right now you're back in the 3D workspace. You're no longer working with your sketch. So you can only work with relations.
Oh yeah.
Yes, you need to edit the sketch again.
Why is it yellow now?
It's either because you have everything selected or there's an error, but
I just click the sketch button and it.
Oh, wait, oh, that just means you had it selected. To edit the sketch, remember you need to
Why
right
is
click
it
it
red?
and hit edit. Red most likely means that you over constrain something, which is also something that can happen when you apply too many relations and the rules start to contradict each other.
And how do I like get it out?
So we'll go through this more carefully next week since it seems like we're out of time, but for the time being, what you would do normally is go through and figure out which of the rules is causing the problem and just delete that constraint. And hopefully that brings you back to a fully constrained but not over constrained state. In your case, since the sketch was more of like a practice thing, you can probably just delete it and start over. And that's probably faster than trying to figure out which of the many constraints are causing your problem. So unfortunately, we are at the end of the class time. Before we go, I'll just leave you with a few last words, which is kind of a summary of what we did today, which is everyone now has Onshape, which is a great success. We all know how to move throughout this workspace, and we can go in and out of our documents. Once you go into your document, you know how to move around, and you know how to create sketches. Within sketches, you also learned how to create simple drawings in a 2D environment using the first two tools, the line and the rectangle. And the thing that I really want you to think about between this week and next week is this idea of relations, the idea of these rules that you can apply, things that you learn in geometry, like parallelness, tangentness, horizontal, vertical, perpendicular. And you're going to apply these to your entities within the sketch in order to create a shape. So we'll pick up next week where we left off, and we'll just go through a few more sketching examples before we go into maybe the first project, which is going to be something like probably like the sprocket handle wheel. If you're really interested, like motivated and want to practice something over the span of the week, what I'd recommend is, as a challenge, try to create a rectangle that is tilted like so. You can imagine like a rhombus shape. Try to create this shape and give it the appropriate relations so that even when you drag one of the points around, it still stays as a rhombus instead of deforming into like weird trapezoids or kites, however I drag them. Make them keep its essentially like parallelogram or square nature, just in a tilted way. Like so. So you should be able to drag it more or less like this and like this, but not like this. And what you're going to want to use is like practice using relations. You'll probably want parallel, maybe perpendicular, maybe equal. If you have some experience with geometry, that'll give you a hint on how to get started. Otherwise, just like practice with sketches, and that's pretty much it. I'll see you again at 6:30 next week, same time, same place. And if you have any last minute questions, I'll stick around for a few more seconds, but that is it.